Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. My name's Les. I'm a nerd. I have an addiction, and it's flight sim. So today we're going to talk about SimConnect and external tools. Why we as users actually can benefit from some of these things the developers get access to. A lot of us who have a lot of controls and panels and things, we want to know how do we bind them and how do we connect them. So I did something similar in 2023. Since then, so much has transpired that opened up things that we were looking for. On top of which, we now have 2024, and I wanted to cover just similar concepts about how we can now bind things. So one of the number one things is always about is, well, how do I get this control? Well, those are SimVars and Sim events. So one of the number one things we have in Microsoft Flight Sim and P3D and FSX is something called SimConnect. SimConnect is something developers use a lot. That's how they integrate with the sim. It's exposing data outside. So why, as a user, should I understand it? Well, if you understand how the sim is working and how it's interfacing, it makes it easier for you to connect your things into the sim. All right, so SimConnect is our gateway. This is what is allowing us to have interaction into the sim. It's giving us a bidirectional interface. Not only can you send events into it, you are reading from it. This is giving us our variables and our access to put data on these displays. If you were like me and you did a MobiFlight build yesterday, it was a lot of fun, the radio panel. Similar type thing. For them to interface with the sim, they're using SimConnect. That's how they pull and interface with this data. And if you know how to find this stuff, it makes life easy. Now, another thing that a lot of people don't know is it's not just the same computer. SimConnect does run. It is on your network. There is a way to access the data through your network. If you want to run a separate computer that's running software that's going to interface and run those panels, it is possible to do that. So whether it's local or remote, you have access to it. This is where your application hardware layer comes in. So this is where applications, whether it's MobiFlight, SpadNext, AAO, SimApp Pro from WinWing, they're going to devise an application layer that then interfaces with the hardware. And this is where a lot of people come short. Software is hard to do. Hardware, they do a very good job of. Sometimes they miss on the software. So your hardware is then connecting to the application layer. The application layer then talks SimConnect. And this is how you end up with 20 things running on your computer. Because you have all these cool things. I'm addicted. I buy way too many toys, and I keep adding more and more. So as you add all these things, you end up with more applications running that are accessing through SimConnect, and then you have to figure out, how do I make it do the thing I want it to do? So that's SimConnect. So it's all about the variables, or vars, and events. And the most important thing is you want to be sending events and reading variables. It is possible to write variables. A lot of times writing a variable is not the best thing, just because when you write it, the sim itself may not have update code running that understands, if you wrote just the variable, to do the other things. So you always want to try to send an event first. SimVars. So I published a bunch of links. I'm sure the PowerPoint will get sent out, or people can download it. This is the documents on Flight Sim. Yes, there's some weird information, but knowing it and reading it as a user, we can learn from it, and we can find out, okay, this is what I need to go look for. So in SimConnect, everything has a letter. The reason for the letter is that's a prefix that gets sent with a command or an instruction into the sim. So an AVAR is the basic simulation variables. And a lot of these you don't want to write. So AVAR is your basic simulation variable. And then B, which is all new, and it's so cool. Bs are cool. Bs are the best thing ever. Hence, I guess, B, best thing ever. We'll get into that a bit. But you have a letter and you send it in. The things that come up that are most important to us, though, is events. So a B variable is also a B event. And we'll cover it in a little bit, but This is the new cool kid on the block, is the B stuff. And we got access to it late 2023, beginning of 2024. HTML events was introduced with Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. The H events, or HTML events, these are passed between all the JS HTML gauges. So this is why when 2020 came out, we couldn't press a button on a GPS unit. We couldn't do a lot of things. And then our friends in all these wonderful add-on software like SPAD, they developed a WASM bridge. People are like, what's WASM? WebAssembly code. So they had to put these little bridges in, which basically loaded as like a gauge. And it was how they could send commands into the sim, was this new HTML event. So there's no way directly through SimConnect to actually send H events. So that's why all these applications need to install something into your community folder, is so they can talk to these other devices. Now, with B events and developers that implement B events, we get the H event sent for free. The B event controls the animation, and by flicking that switch, it then sends the H event. So a lot of the newer stuff in 2024 is really awesome what they've done. K events is what you've always known even since the first days of Flight Sim. So K event was keyboard event. And this is what in standard Microsoft Flight Sim, when you're binding stuff in the Microsoft UI, that's what you're sending. It's a K event. So if somebody says, oh, send the standard K event, this is what they're talking about, is the original, the Mac Daddy. One of the big pieces we use a lot with add-on aircrafts are local variables, or LVARs. You'll hear the term LVAR used a lot. A local variable is something that the sim, when it loads, that plane, that developer, that scenery, whatever it may be, they're going to load that for us as a local variable. So you only get access to it as soon as it loads in. There's no global list like we have with AVARs. So that's why sometimes people are like, oh, why is it missing? Well, it's not loaded. And so a lot of times when you're setting up your sim and you want to set up all your switches, it's best just to load directly onto the runway. You load onto the runway, and by loading onto the runway, everything will get exposed. And even some things won't expose until you flip a switch. So you might have to go into the virtual cockpit, move something a couple times with your mouse, and at that point, it will be available to go ahead and pull in. Mouse variables. We don't have access to these, but they're useful in behaviors to see what a mouse click will do. And so when you look in the Behaviors tab, you'll find out about those. Other things that we have no access to are things like calculator events and custom simvars and WIWIs. I never get it right. Boris knows exactly what it is. But those are things that run inside of the sim. We don't really need it to bind stuff. So the notable ones that we commonly use for binding displays, LEDs, things that we are reading back from the sim, those are going to be AVARs and LVARs. Now, there is supposed to be an easy way to subscribe to variables in B events. It will crash the sim if you're in the wrong menu and you ask for that B event. So some people are like, I'm in the main menu selecting a plane, and all of a sudden the sim crashes. A lot of times it's because maybe you have a Stream Deck or something running, and it's now trying to pull a BVAR, and that BVAR is not loaded. So they're working on it, whether it's MobiFlight, SPAD, all of them, those guys are trying real hard. It's not their fault. It'll get better, though. So one of the other tools you have at your disposal that's really nice is the documentation. So they list all this out. Obviously, developers need to read it, but you as a user, me, I go here a lot because it's easy to search. So I can search for things in a GPS category, in a radio category, whatever it may be, and it's going to tell you, like, this is what this AVAR does. This is the information it's giving you. And so this is a tool that even us as users, not developers, we can use this to find out and make our life a little bit easier when we're trying to work through the mess to say, okay, I need to map this thing to this display. What variable am I looking for? So the number one thing we want to do, though, when sending to the sim, I flip a switch, I press a button. I want to send an event first. The last thing I want to do is write a variable, because it may be multiple variables that need to be written. So not one, it might be multiple. And so with the event, that's how they're interpreting it. And a lot of times, if you look into how a switch is coded, it'll show you that it is doing multiple things. So if you can find the event that will trigger it, then it does all the heavy lifting for you. So always try to map an event first and look at a variable last. So you've got the three types of main events that you're going to look for. And the B event is the best ever. Best ever events. That must be why they chose B. This is what came late in 2020. It was actually SU5. And it's when we lost a lot of control, because until basically software update 15, we had no access through SimConnect to B events. And as the developers bound it all, because you tie it directly to the animation in the project, they could bypass having to go to SimConnect, having to write some stuff, and that made it more efficient. So obviously for Xbox and other things, this was a thing that they did that really helped make it more efficient. And when we come to 2024, you're going to find almost all of the default planes are running on B events. There's a lot of stuff that you can't even trigger. Even in the default 172, you can't turn on the avionics switches without using a B event. It's only in B. It's the only place you'll find it. Some planes will still listen to some of the K events and some of the older events. And then I kind of alluded to this earlier, but what's really nice is the B event is searchable. So with applications like SPAD, when you search for LVARs and B events, once the plane is loaded, it's going to go out and it's going to find all that for you, and it's going to populate it. Well, you can't do that with H events. H events are completely buried in the code, and especially with 2024 and everything being streamed now, there's no way to search for it. So like last week before we came out, we had to take the Starship manual, and we had to pull all of the H events out of the Starship manual. ChatGPT is awesome. It parsed everything for us. But we take that, and then we upload it, we make it available to everyone. But that requires human interaction. When you are able to trigger things from a B event, so even all now the stock GNSs from working title, the G1000s, all of them, those H events are now accessible by flipping the B event, which I'm, again, a little bit of a addiction. I love doing hardware. I want to see the switch move in the sim. There are some planes you can control them, but you have to like never look that the switch actually moves. I want those to map. So the B event gives us that access. H events is going to send to the actual JS HTML code and fire the trigger. So those are also available, and if you don't care about the button moving, you can send those direct. Key events or K events, those are the standard Microsoft things. They've been around forever. And these are also what you're going to find inside of Microsoft Flight Sim. So even using this stuff that we're talking about today, there is a way without using third-party software if it's available. And that's where the problem is. A lot of the B event stuff isn't available. So just like the variables, if you go onto the documentation, you're going to be able to search by category and make it a little bit easier for you to be like, okay, I want to start controlling a throttle axis. Okay, these are the key events that you're looking for. So it helps a little bit with all the other software to be able to find it. And there's a lot. So there's a ton of K events, and there's a ton of information, and if you click on it and you search, it'll make your life a lot easier. Of course, the funny part is there's all these K events for G1000 stuff. They don't work in the sim because they're not tied to JS HTML. Those are all for P3D and FSX. So how does the sim work? So everything's about SimVars and events. So how do they connect planes? So basically when you flip a switch, press the autopilot nav button. That's going to send the K event of autopilot nav1 hold into the sim. And the sim is going to process this, and then it's going to spit out the data, right? And this is why it's important to understand. If you try to just write the data directly, it may not do what the plane is intending because the plane was taking that trigger and doing a couple of other things. So that's why you want to try to send an event always. So we read this data, and that's how we light up a button or an LED. Now, how third parties had to do stuff before, and now this goes back a little ways because we don't have to do this anymore, but every third party had to build everything around LVARs. They had to customize their systems. So whether it was even the Aerosoft CRJ, but if it's PMGG, it's whoever, they build all of their stuff around their custom systems using LVARs. Well, the sim, they still have to tell it to run the autopilot in basically pitch and roll mode or heading and VS mode. And under the hood, they remap things. But if you're just connecting your standard stock device, like a Logitech multi-panel using their plugin, you're always in heading mode. I don't understand. Why is this light lighting up? And that's where guys like MobiFlight and Spadnex come in, and they give us the ability to remap all of our devices. So understanding that basically there's an interpretation when you click a button in the sim, and they kind of go off on this little off ramp, and they do their own little mixing, hence the DJ, they're mixing. But they make a different change, and the information that's on the PFD or their virtual cockpit isn't representative of what's actually going on in the sim. So then they send an event to the sim, it processes the data, but again, they don't use the actual AVAR, they hide that, and then they process their own application, and they show you the data. So a lot of times, we have to send an LVAR. So with the Aerosoft CRJ, for example, one of the first ones in 2020, they had LVAR events. Now, it's not really an event. It's a piece of data. It's a local variable. You'd set it to a 1, which is pushing the button, and it automatically resets to 0. So it just automatically does that, but that was their way of accepting an event and translating that into, I want to push the autopilot nav button. With PMDG planes, I mean, they came up with this really great concept. Everybody else, there's a whole bunch of other developers that do it. The MD-11 does it. They use rotor brake events. So rotor brake was a K event that you could put data with, right? Ignore rotor brake, because it's like, isn't that a helicopter thing? It was just that it was one of the only events you could send data in with and nobody used. And so what they did was they would use the first 3 digits was a switch number in their cockpit. And then it follows up with all kinds of data. 0 was switch off, 1 is switch on. You get up to 16,000, that emulates a mouse click. The PMDG system is phenomenal. Everything in the cockpit has a rotor brake event. You send that to the sim, and then you read their LVAR, and everything works. They're phenomenal. When Working Title got involved, before they became who they are, they were modifying the CJ4, and so they added H events. So we could send an H event in, but they did the same thing. They drove the stock autopilot under the hood, and we had to read out from them these LVARs. Now, they've totally changed the system. It's amazing what these guys from Working Title have done. So in Software Update 5, when they became basically a first-party developer, they came out with the G1000 NXI. And when they did this, they also introduced one of the coolest things was basically avionics managed mode. What that allowed is now a developer can tell the sim, I'm going to be controlling the avionics, don't write anything. So even though they're running the sim in pitch and roll mode, everything with the AVARs is now writable. And they actually override and write the AVARs. So it's amazing what these guys have done. They really have brought us forward. What they're doing is they're intercepting all those events. So when you send a nav command to the sim now, they no longer let it go through. They intercept it, they block it off, they put it into their custom autopilot, processing everything they do, and then they send pitch and roll commands to the sim, and then they lie to the sim and say, oh, just say this AVAR is on. But you're really in pitch and roll. So it's very, very cool what they've done. And a lot of other developers are now leveraging this. So whether it's PMS with their stuff, TDS partially uses this mode as well. So even like the TDS 750XI, which uses the Garmin trainer, when you're in nav mode, it's actually taking control of the autopilot. As soon as you go into an ILS or go back into heading mode, they give it back to the regular sim. So they're not fully doing the autopilot. So 100% of control and access or editing of hardware, that's what I want to do. I don't know about the others. Like I said, I'm a little addicted. I want every button and switch to do something. So there are tools. Whether you buy third-party tools, there are free tools. So again, if you go to the docs and you go to the SDK, you can download SimVar Watcher. SimVar Watcher is free. So you can, again, use that list we talked about. You can look up some things. You can add it to a list. You can hit connect, and it will show you those VARs. And as you touch stuff in the sim and you're switching buttons, it's going to update, and it's going to show you what those values are, and now you know what variable I need to map. The other thing that's really useful is in dev mode is the behavior tool. So yes, it's dev mode, but guess what? As users, this is really good for us too. So in dev mode, you want to go to the tools menu and open up behaviors tab. From the behaviors tab, you can monitor all the LVARs, so you don't need a third-party tool, but I still think everybody needs a third-party tool because binding is way better with them. You can see all the LVARs. You can see everything that's loaded. You know what to look for. You can see things changing. The other thing that's awesome about dev mode, especially in 2024, because they cleaned it up a lot. So you're seeing on the left is 2024's behaviors tab. Before, it was a convoluted structure that you had to like go down and dig through and really understand. And now they've presented it in such a clean way. You hover your mouse over a switch. You press Control-G. You might need to be in windowed mode. Apparently, some people told me I'm always in windowed mode, but apparently in full screen, it doesn't always work. But you press Control-G, and it will show you, like we're seeing right now on the left, it will show you all of the stuff about that switch. So now I can see the information that I need. In SPAD Next, which I use a lot, it's my favorite tool, they've got a data monitor, they've got an event monitor, so I can pop those out and I can run those. But what I've showed you before is something you can do without having to buy something. Now SPAD, love it, I'll never give it up. All right, let's use an example of how we find stuff. So we're going to use FlySimware's C24R Sierra. I may or may not have a personal attachment to this plane. By the way, thank you to Viper for taking pictures on the airside tour. Turns out I'm parked over next to PMDG. Maybe they'll trade for the Falcon, don't know. We'll see. So some of these developers, people always say like, hey, why is this switch only available as an LVAR? Well, they can't help it. Great example. So in the C24R, our landing and taxi light in our plane is one switch. It's a 3-position switch. Basic sim stuff doesn't understand 3-position switches, right? They have the B events. The B events are awesome, but that's not exposed to you if you want to map it to your hardware just through the sim itself. So great. We're going to hover our mouse over top of the landing and taxi light. We're going to press Control-G, and it's going to give us all the information. Now, on the bottom left of the screen, what you're seeing is a zoomed-in portion to try to make it bigger. But this is what's so cool about 2024. It now makes it so easy for us to see exactly the B events and all bindings. So not just B events. We'll see a K event example in a second. But they also now expose the variables really easy for us to find out what we can read. So you might find that we have to write a B event to switch the switch, but there may be an AVAR. So in the longitude and the CJ4, there's a bunch of switches. We have to use the B event. It moves it, which we want. It triggers the event. But what's cool is you might find an AVAR or in this case, they call it a global variable, but that's an LVAR. So we can use that. So with this example, there's actually two ways because of how Mark from FlySimware coded it. He built it back in 2020, and when he built the plane, he did add B events, but he always built stuff around LVARs. Some planes, you'll only be able to use an LVAR. They may have put stuff in around a B event, but it was just so that they could get the information. They could do the tool tips, they could do the stuff, but it doesn't actually link in. You still have to write an LVAR. So in this case, I actually can do it two ways, but for sure on the Stream Deck, where I want to read the switch and move the switch and have it do positions in the display, I'm going to read this LVAR, generic landing light. Now I can set that LVAR, so that's what's really cool. So in SPAD, I'm going to go into the data monitor, and I'm going to search landing. It's going to pop up the landing light. I'm going to add that to my data monitor, and then I move the switch in the plane, and I see the value changing. I know what value I need to set. So a lot of times what I do is I make a short press, which moves it, increases the value, and a long press decreases the value if it's more than one mode, right? It just depends. A 3-position switch, I'll do it that way. It does mean they have to hold it a little bit longer to go to taxi mode. At the exact same time, right, you also, with this plane, can use the B events. Now in 2024, we're going to need to use this with a lot of the stock planes from most of it anyway. But this is what is really special about how easy it is. Control G brings it up. So you have the standard B events, which are in yellow. Those are kind of the standard ones. They're there for everything. The set value, you can write the value, and it'll move it to the position. In 2024, we've now got the extended events, and we have access to these. So now I can like right-click in SPAD when I'm adding an event, and I can now extend it. So from the right-click menu, I can now add some standardized ones like increment, decrement, toggle, or I can do custom and then just add up, center, down. So now I have added center, and when I push this button, it will send that event, and it does exactly everything in the sim for me. B events are really cool. The animations are tied to it. It just makes everything so much better. Now, when we look at, for example, the nav light switch. So the nav light switch is an on-off switch in the C24. There, absolutely, Mark is tying it to the AVAR. He's not going to build a custom LVAR event. He's going to give us a standard event. So sure, the nav light will work with any stock driver and stock binding system. What I wanted to highlight was this is where when you press that Control G, you're going to see blue. Blue events are those stock key bindings. That's that stock K event. If you see the blue one, you can use the standard bindings in Microsoft Flight Sim. So what you want to do is use similar wording, because obviously the exact K event with nav underscore lights underscore on, which is what you'll see in the docs, isn't how they portray it to us in key binding. But if I just search for nav lights, I found those exact same 4 events. So even within the standard sim bindings, if you see blue, there is a reason to use dev mode. Go into dev mode, search on the switch. If you see blue, that's how you know you'll be able to map it even without third-party software. So those are the things about the different ways of doing an LVAR, a B event, or a K event. I don't know about you guys, my favorite plane is the Honda Jet. Well, favorite jet. My favorite plane is obviously the C-24. So I love the Honda Jet. The H-Jet was amazing. Marwin did a phenomenal job, and it's what I'm using as the example for H events. So luckily now in 2024, most of this stuff we'd be able to trigger by B events. However, with it, it hasn't been fully moved yet. All of these things, though, you can send the exact same event that any of these knobs, buttons, or joysticks are sending into it. And again, another really useful resource, the Microsoft GitHub I/O, Microsoft Avionics. So working title documents all of their avionics that is made available to developers. They've documented it so well. It's very good. Don't worry, they got some things they could fix, but everything is well documented, including an H event list, because as a developer, when you're coding the switches and what it's supposed to send, it needs to send these H events. So we as users can go off and take that wonderful work that they've done, and we can basically mooch off of it. So by finding these events, you can add these events. So on the right-hand side, this is what developer mode looks like in 2020. So 2024, they did such an amazing job on making things more accessible. This is how we had to find it. You had to keep clicking on these little triangles, making your way down until eventually you found the knob, and then you found the information. So Control G still works. It gets you like 80% of the way there. You want to just go through that list if you're using 2020 still, and you want to look for mouse events. There's going to be a triangle, left mouse click. Click on that, and then inside of it, you're going to start finding the important information as to what H event to send. Now, in the case of the HJet, everything was published inside of a document, right? And so we're seeing this more and more. Some of the developers are publishing everything. The Starship just came out, and again, great job by Nick over there, because he documented everything. So it's real easy for us to open up the manual, go to the back, and be like, okay, I want to push this button in the sim, and he's documented and said, this is the event. So just like what FlightFX did with the HJet, we have every variable available to us. And they even put it up in their documentation of, this is what you can do with standard sim events. This is what you would use if you're using MobiFlight, SpadNext, AAO, something like that. And there are things like the G3000. There is nothing we can bind in the sim. So the G1000s, the 3000s, all of those things we can't bind in the sim. There's no direct button mapping. We have to use third-party software. Okay, so once I know what I want to do, I can map that to a button. I can send the H event in SPAD. That's how I do it. This is where we were talking about B events and LVARs are things that are discoverable. They can search for them and they can pull them out of the sim. You can't do that with H events. So in the case of something like the Starship, until somebody else basically does the work and pulls it all out and sends it up to one of, whether it's MobiFlight, HubHop, SPAD internally, it's not available to you. So a lot of times in those applications, until it's available, you have to create it yourself. So whether it's in MobiFlight, entering it manually, AEO, SPAD, you have to enter client events. That's why we really like the B event stuff. You can now search for it and it triggers it, so you don't have to worry about it. So again, B events are the greatest thing. They're awesome. I think Microsoft did a really good job on this. X-Plane had this for years, where every plane had a set of commands, custom commands. You could map the command. You read the variable. Worked great. B events is really that thing that, as we're progressing in the Microsoft world, they're exposing and they're making better. We still have a little bit of work to go, I think, on making sure the sim doesn't crash. If you're in a menu and you request an LVAR or a BVAR, you will crash the sim. So there's still some work I think they need to do so that they don't crash on us. But it's amazing what they're bringing for us. And I really do think that us as simmers, I know a lot of times we think they're just about the Xbox crowd. I love the Xbox crowd. I need them. They're helping fund it for us. This type of stuff is not for them. This was for us, the hardcore simmer, who wants switches and buttons. They did deliver. They got asked for. They brought it. And in 2024, they've made it better. So is it possible? Absolutely. You can connect everything now. We can map everything. We can make switches. It's really come a long way since the FSX days. So 100% control and access? Absolutely. You can do it all now. There's nothing I can't edit or bind. So thank you. If there's any questions, I think I left enough time. And thank you so much for coming. We're good? Okay. Sweet.